It's my daughter.
That was your daughter.
Hello and welcome to Congregation Lador Vador. I am Rabbi Stephen Moskowitz, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to this evening's community program. For those joining us online through live stream, Facebook, or YouTube, we welcome you. For those of you who live in the area, we hope you will join us in person one day. Our programs and services are open to the community. A few reminders about our upcoming programs before turning to this evening's talk. This coming Monday at 7 p.m. on Zoom, join me for a three-part series discussing questions of faith. On Tuesday evening, again on Zoom, we'll be joined by Charles Jacobs, who will discuss anti-Semitism and how current times require a new response. And finally, on Wednesday, November 17th, again at 7 p.m., we'll be joined by Representative Steve Israel, who will talk with Fareed Firdoz, an Afghani who served with U.S. forces in Afghanistan, and they will discuss the current situation there. This evening, we are joined by Elizabeth Bernich, who will be introduced by our host, Andrew Sandler. In addition to being a longtime member of our congregation, Andrew is the managing director of Sandler Capital, which he joined in 1991. He is head of the firm's hedge fund business and has served as portfolio manager for the firm's flagship hedge funds since June of 1997. I look forward to this evening's conversation and learning more about the current job market, as well as the differences between traditional and modern leadership styles. Welcome, Liz Bernich and Andrew Sandler.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, and welcome, everybody. I'm just going to read Liz's bio, and then I'm going to give it to her to really talk about your background and so forth. So, Liz Bernich is a partner at Caldwell's Financial Services and Private Equity and Venture Capital Practices. With over 15 years of search experience, she has led senior levels across a diverse set of senior leadership functions within finance, capital raising, marketing, and investments for clients that span from private equity, venture capital, alternative and traditional investment management, insurance, technology, and real estate. To sum up, if you're in the job market or you're hiring, here's the expert, and she knows what's going on and knows how to match employee to employer. So Liz, with that, why don't you take it from there?
Thank you, Andrew. I know it's kind of a mouthful.
It was a mouthful.
I have two key focuses, really. Financial officers across industry verticals, which is financial services, real estate, and technology predominantly. And on the other side, it's the capital raising side of the equation for private equity, hedge, and venture capital funds. And I've been in search, as noted, for actually 25 years, but about 10 of those years I was our CFO and COO, toggling back to my days at Deloitte. So as mentioned, the solution of talent is one that I focus on. And there's always some sort of imbalance in the market. It'll be interesting to talk about that with you today, and here to explore the idea of more of a modern leadership style versus a traditional leadership style as being a real game changer for those who are looking to bring on talent.
Thanks, Liz. So with that, why don't we dig right into what those changes are on the margin, whether it be generational changes, COVID changes, and why don't you dive from there into really the differences between what are we talking about, traditional versus modern?
Sure. So the idea of traditional leadership is really one that dates back to our parents' and grandparents' generations and beyond. It's really more of that authoritative style, one that is a little bit more uniform in approach to the team. And the modern leadership style is one that really focuses more on the human being in your group and on your leadership team, rather than assuming everyone shares the same desires for their career, for their financial well-being, et cetera. So it's interesting, in thinking about this and preparing for this discussion, I think back to really a huge shift in the industry, just in general, the economy, back to the dot-com era, because at that point, the technology industry really took on a massive life of its own and was so influential across our entire country. Not just the Silicon Valley, not just New York, but really the entire country. And now we all see pressure from that community into industry verticals, because they're poaching from industry verticals to try to attack that industry. So for example, consumer products. And they're tapping consumer product experts to effectively be able to understand that market better. So I think back to that, where there were ping pong tables and beer nights and pizza nights, and people were dressing in jeans, which was a huge change. You know, when I left Deloitte and joined the search firm, I couldn't even wear a pantsuit. I mean, and that was 96. It wasn't like that was 1980. So the whole idea of wearing jeans and a button down, or even a collared shirt, you know, an IZOD shirt.
Let alone ping pong.
Right, exactly, was very different. So they started immediately grabbing talent and just smart people who were capable, that traditionally had gone to other avenues, professional services, maybe investment banking, insurance, et cetera. So I think back to that era, and what they did was it was brave, there was a risk there, but they got great talent, and they basically pulled on heartstrings of what did people want. They wanted a more flexible lifestyle. They wanted to actually not spend $1,000 on a suit. They wanted to pay $75 or $150 on a pair of jeans, and you know, an IZOD shirt that cost them $45, $50, as opposed to a, you know, fancy French cufflink kind of shirt. So I think that the whole idea of modern leadership is really tapping into EQ, and asking the leader to be more sensitive to each individual having more particular desires for their own career, their financial well-being, et cetera. And it's interesting because I was, again, kind of preparing for this and doing some research around the statistics, found that changing behavior at the leadership level actually gives a company over an 80% chance of increasing revenue.
Yeah, you told me this number. I was astonished that these stats.
It's crazy. So an 81% greater chance of growing revenue versus an 84% chance of declining revenue if you have traditional leadership in place, where it's that, you know, more authoritative style. You're not listening to your people. You're not giving 360 review opportunities to your team. And then on the other side, it's also, there's a huge risk of layoffs, right? So you're gonna more likely lose talent to the tune of
tend to cut costs. Yeah.
To the tune of 67%. If your revenue's declining, you're going to have to lay off people. And where I saw this kind of tying in to be an interesting topic for tonight was this really affects everybody across all generations, because whether it be a grandparent who's at Thanksgiving dinner with their grandchild who's now entering the workforce, or it's a spouse who's trying to support their spouse in their interviewing process or their career development, you know, all the way back down to parents of middle schoolers who are embarking on groups at school, and they're thinking about maybe running for one of those student council positions or captain of one of their sports teams. leadership is something that really can span generations, and I don't think there's any particular siloed nature to it, and that you know, hoping that this is an interesting topic and a helpful one for the community today.
Great, that explains it. Let's get into a little bit about, I guess, you said to me something like, we interviewed these young, new people entering the workforce and what motivates them. And
Yep.
I'm like, okay, work at home, lifestyle, but actually it was not that, and it was.
Yeah, actually,
right?
so through years and years of interviewing across functions and across levels, what's come to note is almost everyone is primarily motivated by the opportunity to make an impact at their company, rather than their compensation being first in line or promotion opportunity. It was really their opportunity to feel like they're providing value, which in turn usually means that they're also growing. So the second is usually that someone wants to grow their own career and learn something new, not just do the same thing. People are just not motivated by these routine kind of jobs. And if you have jobs like that at your company, you may want to think about ways of automating that. Perfect example is the world of professional services and public audit. So much of the audit process has been automated now with software. I didn't even know that until my niece started in the industry just last year. It was something that came out in conversation with her, whereas when I was in public accounting in 1994, we didn't do any of that. We didn't use software. We used manual sheets. So every industry has these kind of manual legacy systems or processes that can be probably automated,
Right.
which in turn kind of give your people the opportunity to learn and do something different,
grow,
elevate them, save your company some costs, but also give people the opportunity to grow their career. And you know, toggling back to the primary motivator for most people in looking for a new opportunity is they want to provide impact, they want to make a mark. So as you think about your own team, as you think about the people in your life, are they providing that mark? How are they leaving their last company in a better position than when they found it? And that's something to think about for each one of us in our job every day.
Yeah, certainly to the employer who may have to treat these people differently or think of new roles for them.
Right. And it kind of comes down to that whole idea of sitting with them. And, you know, people may sometimes not have one-on-ones more than once a year, but I would encourage a more frequent one-on-one where you actually do. You show you care, you have a conversation, you ask the questions. Sometimes it's just a really simple question.
What would you like to do?
Exactly. What do you like about what you do? And what would you do differently if you kind of had a blank piece of paper?
Yeah.
You may have this at your company where
Yeah, okay, well, we'll talk about my company, but we've mostly farm raised and let people grow. And every time we've hired high, it has not worked out. So we'll talk about that after. Why don't you give us, Liz, let's really back up.
Okay.
Current state of the job market. Just what are you seeing out there?
well,
Hiring, matches, panicking, non-panicking, wages,
Yep.
just subjectively.
so subjectively there's an emotional state happening right now where people are, all you see in the news is about the Great Recession or Great Resignation, and wage increases. You've got minimum wage increases. You've got bus driver shortages, shortages of fast food workers. You've got shortages of talent across industries. And I think that I don't necessarily think that there's a terrific imbalance. I think it was partially due to companies all coming back online at once that were in certain industries, for example, hospitality. All of those restaurants started to hire all back at the same time. There's only so many people who can serve in those functions or who want to serve in those functions. I think that the human being tendency of being introverted and at home is a bit of a temporary thing. I don't think everybody wants to work at home forever. I think there's still a little bit of uncertainty around the safety of going back to the subways or what have you, and so that's causing some trepidation. And people are worried about kind of a firm rule being set down in front of them to have to go back. I think that's driving some people to be more reluctant to go back to work if they were out of work. I do feel that there is some imbalance because there haven't been very many industries that have been affected negatively by this last year and a half. And so a lot of companies have actually been expanding. So that's driving an imbalance in the talent market inherently because people just, there's not enough people for the increase in jobs. In other economic cycles, there have been downturns, right? There have been like the 08, 01, I mean, there are a whole bunch of them, right, that we've been through in our careers.
Although the government's never given money out like this, so that helped a lot. The PPP and so forth and so on.
Yeah, I mean, I think PPP helped companies keep people on staff.
Yeah.
And so that is a very valid point. I personally don't believe that unemployment checks are what's keeping people home. I just don't think it's enough money. I think maybe people have cut back their expenses and they're trying to figure out the way forward, but I don't think that it will last. I think there's always a cycle and it will fix itself over time. We all know it's coming. We just don't know when, right? This correction. You can't hit new highs every single day.
Really?
I know. Well, I mean, I don't mind it because my retirement balances are going up. However, something's got to give, right? At some point, something's got to give. And I know there have been corrections in some markets. For example, travel was hit for a while, hospitality was hit, but now things are bouncing back in some cases more than ever. So being nimble, I think, is really important for leaders of businesses and employers. You have to be nimble and you have to think out of the box a little bit around who you're going to hire, what you're going to look for. What are those key traits? Are those key traits really that someone has this very specific skill set? Or is the key trait more of a personality that you can train and develop? So I think there should be a little bit more emphasis on the behavior and the motivator, right? Drilling into what motivates people and what their inherent ability is as opposed to their trained ability.
Are you seeing the wage inflation, or is it not as pervasive at the high end? Are you seeing people panicking? Are you seeing the 3 days from home or 2 days from home, work in the office, but not work in the office? What are you seeing on those trends?
Okay. So I am seeing that people want some flexibility. And in some polls of some recent conferences that I've attended, the general theme is companies are going to a 50-50 schedule, which is giving people enough opportunity to have some of their prior and some of their flexibility and kind of figure out the balance, as opposed to this very structured 5 days a week in office.
Like a Friday, Monday off, Friday, Monday, and then Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday in the office.
I mean, I
I'm
think
hearing that a little
every
bit.
company's doing it a little differently,
Right.
and then you hear a little tidbits of, well, if you want to get ahead and you know your boss is going to be in on a Monday and no one else is going to be in, maybe
Right.
that's a good day for some FaceTime. Every company's different, every situation's different, so you kind of have to play it by ear and be a little flexible. But I
Got it.
think
Yep.
at the end of the day, you need to be smart about what do you need to do and how much do you need to be present to be successful in your job. I think each person has a certain responsibility, and each manager has a certain responsibility to figure out what does your team need to actually do, how much time do you actually need your team there to be successful and to accomplish the goals you have. And some of that is just flat out goal setting, right? And it's business planning. It's interesting that you asked about are people panicking, because I have received many more inbound calls and resumes lately. There was a period of, I don't want to say it was as long as 6 to 9 months where I hardly received any inbounds at all, which to me
Sure, it was during the
means
summertime and people wanted,
no, last year,
Last
people
year.
were just heads down. They were trying to figure out their own personal situation.
Right.
I think the reality was most people were so mired in their personal life
Yeah.
and just didn't want to rock the boat. They had elders, children, their own livelihood to worry about, their
Right.
mental health, whatever it was. And they didn't want to start throwing change into the picture. Now, everyone is hearing about there's so many jobs out there and people are overpaying for them. So suddenly, everybody who had even a slight inkling of looking is now more aggressively looking and having conversations and networking. There's still a lot of flexibility to interview from home while they're working from home, right? So I definitely noticed that in my business. It has made search processes be much more efficient because we've been able to have candidates interview with clients more freely than in the past. We don't have travel schedules to work around, et cetera. But I do sense that people are starting to feel a little bit like they're going to get left behind and they're going to miss something if they don't look now. I do not think that's the case at all. I think there's always an inherent amount of networking people are smart to do just for their own career. You should always be networking and talking with people who are really good at what they do in your business. That's just your own personal obligation and responsibility for your own career. But I don't necessarily think that there's going to be you miss the boat. There's always opportunity out there. But I am feeling a little bit of that panic. What was the first question?
Wage inflation.
Wage inflation. I am definitely seeing more inflation around certain functions. For example, the CFO function. With as many companies that have been going public by SPAC merger, there is a greater demand on CFOs, for example, with public company experience. That market has seen pressure. There is definitely pressure on capital raising professionals because if you can walk in with a Rolodex of relationships while investors are still not taking a lot of in-person meetings, but they'll take a phone call from someone they know, yes, I'm seeing inflation in certain spots where there's like that proven experience and there's a real stress between the supply and demand. There's a lot of tension there. That's where I am seeing some significant wage increase and pressure. But I do think that there will be some sort of adjustment because I don't think they were terrifically out of line in the past. I think that right now companies are going to overpay if they really need someone with that specific skill set that helps them move the needle for their business. Because they're going to look at that increase of compensation, whatever percent, and they're going to look at their whole company's growth and say, well, it's going to be worth it for me to maybe spend $50,000 or $100,000 extra if we're going to grow by $1 million, right? So the gross margin on that, they're going to look at that.
Right. All right, thanks. Let's talk about this in-person versus videoing, hiring etiquette, training. Let's talk about that whole issue.
Kind of life right now in this
and where you think it's
weird-
going. And I mean, clearly the interns over the last year or two probably were the ones that really took it hard. I mean, they had no
Sure.
one to.
Yeah.
But what are you seeing on that front?
Well,
Principals are definitely going to come into the office less than they used to.
yes. And I think that each company has had to figure out new ways of connecting with their teams and encouraging collaboration, encouraging idea generation, creativity, et cetera. And I'll use my company as an example. We now have a group called Caldwell Reads, where we get together every other month, and it's a book group. But it's across offices of people that I don't normally see. We have a Peloton group, we have other special interest groups, and people had the opportunity to join whatever one they wanted, or none of them if they wanted. So it wasn't a forced mandate, but it's given us all the opportunity of interacting with each other more than, I really don't think in my heart of hearts that we would have had these groups if COVID hadn't happened. Nothing would have forced that change, but COVID happened, we all got stuck at home. We have an international company with 18, 19 different offices. We had to figure out ways to bring people together, even if it was just the 5 people in the Dallas office, bringing them back together, figuring out different ways. So I think that I'm hopeful that some of that sticks around after everyone is back to normalcy, and because I do think that some of that change was well worth it and is well worth keeping. I think that there is a certain amount of forced change on leadership to think about life a little differently at their company, right? What do you want the culture to be? Is your culture one that enforces mandatory presence? Is your company one that just encourages people to deliver the best results they can? It definitely requires more effort, more focus, more time, more attention. But in my opinion, that's what you're responsible for as a leader. So it shouldn't be a big shock, and it shouldn't be something that people kick and scream about. And I think that they have to do that to keep their talent. I think that it is a shame that there has been, a lack of in-person presence for the junior talent, and I know that there's been a decrease in learning for some in some aspects. I think there's also been an increase in learning in other things. So for example, Zoom meetings. You wouldn't necessarily have an associate on a Zoom meeting 3 years ago, but now they're suddenly interfacing with senior executives in a Zoom meeting, sometimes one-on-one, so they've all of a sudden had to really up their game as it relates to communication, presentation. They can't hide in the corner anymore. So I think it's actually had some benefits. I'm trying to see the silver lining in things, but I think that there are definitely negatives to some of that learning. The learning by osmosis. There's not as much collaboration physically. There's not the water cooler talk. I think it does require you to step out of your comfort zone as a leader, as a manager, as a parent, as a friend. You really have to step out. I mean, I know there's only so much time in the day, but you almost have to do a mental checklist or priority list of what's most important for you to knock off that month, right? And to focus on and to spend, who's most important to spend time with, so that you can have the impact and, keep that connection going. I mean, for example, I have friends that I haven't seen in a year and a half. And, it's just, life didn't bring us together. Does that mean that person's less important? No, it's just that life hasn't brought us together. So I've got to figure out now a way to get back in touch with some people. Same with clients and business contacts, et cetera. And, I think that each one of us, you can certainly not spend the extra energy, and you can certainly let just life kind of take its own path. But if you have motivations and if you want to develop and see things improve, I think it's worth taking stock, if you will, of kind of your personal situation, your business contacts, and just who should you reach out to and check in on. For a while there, people were saying, check in on people, right? Just say hello. How are you?
Right.
And just that simple touch was really meaningful. And I think a lot of us got away from it because we had Zoom fatigue or phone fatigue or what have you. And I think that we kind of need to get that energy back again a little bit, get our stamina back. Interviewing over Zoom is hard. Interviewing without the personal contact, you don't have the handshake intro, taking your coat, putting your bag down, getting a cup of coffee, where that small talk happens. You almost have to make that happen. And
at some point on the process, right?
Yeah, exactly. You have to almost, start to chat try to break the ice a little bit and draw the conversation to a personal level. And to your point, I think at some point in the process, it is good to actually have some in-person time. We've had situations with candidates and clients where they finally were able to meet in person, even if it was just for a walk, because the country regulations didn't let them do anything beyond that. But that broke the ice even further and allowed for them to get to know each other on a different level and progress the relationship. And so we've seen cases where some clients just simply don't have the capacity or the willingness to meet in person. They really want to bring someone on board virtually and do the entire process virtually. That's up to them, right, obviously, but we encourage some sort of in-person, especially now where you can have a cup of coffee outside or a meal outside, or in less crowded places. Just be smart about where you're going, and if it's not you who can do it, maybe it's a colleague who you trust that forms their opinion and gives you their opinion. I just think that in-person touch is really important, and for someone who's interviewing for a job, I think it's equally important that they put their eyes on someone in person and have a chance to really get to know them, assess their leadership style. Is that going to be one that works for them?
Right.
Is there going to be enough opportunity for them to grow over time? And do they feel like this company is the kind of company they want to work for, that other people want to work for, right? Are people leaving in droves? If so, why? Is it leadership? Is it a change in industry? Is there too much pressure? Are they being poached for other opportunities that are beating out that company? I don't know, but it's worth really looking under the hood. I always say to people when they come to me after they've maybe made a move that they've regretted, make sure you don't do that again. Yeah. Really look under the hood as carefully as you can. Think really, really hard about if you're in the same situation in 2 years, how are you going to explain that you made that mistake twice and that you didn't research carefully enough? Because it will start looking messy on your resume, and I just think change is disruptive. We often say that people need to be in a role at least a year, if not 2, before they can actually make an impact. So if you have a resume where you're 18 months at each job, the chances are you're not going to have very strong references or experience to rely on. And I think that goes for everyone. I just think some jobs, certainly you feel like you live dog years, right? It's like you've been there 1 year, you feel like you've been there 5, but I think generally speaking, too much change is disruptive and it doesn't allow you to really get momentum.
Right. You had mentioned to me on the phone certain structural pressures. One of them you mentioned social media pressure. What do you mean? What's going on? You also mentioned investment banker pressure.
Right. So this kind of toggles back to that modern leadership style, right. And similar to how I think the dot-com era really increased pressure on leaders to do things differently, allow more flexibility, be a little more innovative. The advent of social media, it's opened up companies to exposure now more than ever, right? Because all someone needs to do is video maybe poor circumstances at their company, and the next thing you know, you've got a PR emergency on your hands.
Call that PR firm.
Yeah, exactly. On the flip side, I think it has allowed individuals to improve their own well-being, right? And it's allowed human rights to advance. So I again, don't see that it's wildly negative, but in some cases it's certainly exaggerated, and so you need to be careful. And I do think that that the advent of social media and people just being more out there with their commentary, Glassdoor, for example, is interestingly actually a place people go and care about seeing that feedback. I used to completely disregard Glassdoor, and I have now been hearing it much more commonly again of people saying, well, I read about that CEO or the CFO on Glassdoor, and I don't think I want to work for them. So, in some cases, companies are having to solicit positive feedback to put onto Glassdoor so that people will gravitate back to that company that's not a bad company. Maybe they had a blip in their history that there was an issue, or if people weren't, self-aware enough, or maybe there was some industry pressures that caused it. I just think that social media it's another new pressure in our world that like our parents never had to deal with,
Yeah.
right? So it's not only news reporters, but it's social media and everybody being their own reporter now.
I know my firm, we have very strict policies on what I can put on social media about a stock, about my investment opinion, anything like that.
Yeah, I
you
mean,
know,
yeah,
we're
you're going into the insider trading.
Yeah, anything.
Yeah.
Not even, let us say, the short, stock market chart. I mean, it's really,
Yeah. And to your point around our discussion around the investment banker pressure, so earlier this year, Goldman Sachs was under fire for basically having their associates and analysts working 100-hour weeks plus. And they had a policy where at the end of day on Friday, people should have the weekend off. But senior level people were taking advantage of cell numbers, et cetera, and saying, can you just do this quick thing? And 1 hour led to 6 hours, and 100 hours starts piling up, and people's mental health and physical health started getting really challenged. And so, interestingly enough, when I went to look at the news around that, just to refresh my memory, I saw that had happened back in the 90s also. This is not new. It's just that things, again, come in waves, right? But I do think there's a lot more pressure and awareness on mental health, mental well-being. I think in some regards, COVID's brought that back to be even more of a burning issue. I mean, I don't know about you, my personal work schedule is nuts. I'm online at 8, I'm not offline until 10, 10:30, 11. Maybe a break for dinner. So it's great, I get to eat dinner with my family, but I'm working way more hours than I normally would have.
how many hours, what amount of days are you home versus the office now?
I'm still home 5 days a week.
So there's no commute
There's no
issue
commute
anymore?
time, so I love.
That's definitely less stress too, though.
It's actually less physical stress,
Right.
and it's less physical wearing. So I feel like I can put in that extra
Right.
time,
Right.
and I wouldn't trade, having the opportunity to have dinner with my family. My kids are in their teens. This is the time I want to be with them.
Right.
If I was an empty nester, I might feel differently, and I
Right.
might be back in the office, right? So kind of there again, it's like everyone has a different timeline, a different set of pressures at home. Maybe you have elderly family that you need to take care of, and you could use that flexibility. Leaders taking that into account, I think, is really important just from a personal standpoint, and I know others feel the same way. And then, again, like that whole period of 6 to 9 months where I wasn't getting any inbounds because people were so underwater at home. I don't think anybody knows what this winter's going to bring, right? And people are still a little bit worried about, is my kid going to be doing Zoom for school from home again? So I just think a certain amount of flexibility is still very important, even though most people want to be back in the office or with their colleagues in person. I think there's certain functions that perhaps you give a little bit more flexibility to or a leeway to. You try to find an automated solution. You just try to be creative. And I think that creativity, even just the effort, will go a long way. I think that, just when you can show and demonstrate to your people that you care about them and that you're trying, sometimes that in and of itself is enough.
You had asked me what trait I look for, and right there is the one I look for. Flaming in your heart that you care, and I'm gonna bust for you. And if I miss a stock or I'm wrong on a stock, it's gotta bother me.
Right.
It's gotta bother me inside. The people that brush it off, I don't want to hire those people.
And I think there's a certain amount of tenacity that someone needs in certain functions, and then there's a certain amount of cool under pressure that
Yeah.
other people need.
Both.
But truly, to your point, it is that care and concern to perform well and improve, not make the same mistake again.
Right.
I talk to leaders all the time who, if they have to correct someone multiple times, that's really where they draw the line.
Right.
But most people are willing to forgive one or two errors. But when it's the fool me once, fool me twice saying, right? It's, if you are repeating the mistake, you clearly aren't putting in the effort, or you're not capable. Right. That's the other side of it, right? You need to be self-aware enough that maybe there's something that you're missing.
Hedge fund managers are not allowed to throw chairs at their analysts anymore.
Such a shame, isn't it, Andrew? Such a shame.
Such a shame. Let's talk about some other hot topics. DEI, ESG.
Yeah.
What you're seeing, and why don't you explain exactly what it is? So, because to some people, these are just letters.
Sure, I know. So DEI is diversity, equity, and inclusion. And ESG is environmental, social, and governance. They are highly interrelated, but they're also different, right? So when people say ESG, they're typically talking about your footprint, your energy footprint, your climate impact, but also your social impact, and often your the way you're run, right? So are you run as a firm with one person making all decisions? Are you run with more of a balanced opinion and kind of a fairness to it? Obviously the environmental pressures we all know about, but legitimately there are some companies who are doing a lot more about fixing problems, and there are a lot of companies who are even taking a small part by having better recycling in the office, or UPS using electronic vehicles as opposed to gas vehicles, or diesel, whatever they use. So, but DEI that falls under really the social, the S in ESG, although it is quite different and kind of toggles back to that whole concept of modern leadership. So DEI is really, the concept is treating people as human beings that matter and allowing them to express themselves the way that they naturally feel they want to express themselves, that they feel comfortable being in that environment. They feel accepted. In return, they're going to be more productive, they're going to be more creative, they're going to be a participant in your company's success, and not, unhappy or stressed or feeling like they have to hide themselves. And, we're seeing that.
I just had to take a New York State 40-minute thing on this.
Did you really?
Oh, yeah.
It was asking how you...
Gender stuff, what you have to call something. Yeah, just that.
Okay, yeah, and I know it's hard for...
With a test at the end.
So it's interesting, right? Because it's forcing you to think about things very differently. And it's forcing a change in behavior. In a lot of cases, it's asking for us to switch a light switch, which is different and difficult. But it does require added effort and energy, certainly from leaders, to be sensitive to these topics. And I think it's an obligation as a leader to do your research. And if you don't know if you're encouraging an inclusive environment, then you probably aren't, first off. And secondly, you probably need an advisor. So like Caldwell, we have a DEI advisory council that actually comes in and helps companies. They're not full-time employees of Caldwell, they're experts in DEI. We've chosen that path. We feel it's so important, and it is, we're seeing the stock markets require, and the, NASDAQ require a certain number of board members be
Yep.
diverse. And I think everybody has realized that here's another stat. The organizations that exhibit gender and ethnicity diversity are 15% and 35% more likely to outperform less diverse organizations. So if you have gender diversity, you have a 15% greater chance of outperforming the average. Ethnicity goes up to 35%. These are just really important factors. If you have a balanced board, if you have a balanced company, you are more guaranteed to have better business outcomes. It's a fact. And the reason, there are many, many reasons behind that, but in part because it also really matters to millennials. And those millennials are big purchasers, and they're hugely impactful. So we need to acknowledge that and just be comfortable with it, figure out a way forward, but it is very, very important. ESG is sometimes not something that someone can wildly control for their company, but sometimes they can control within their personal life, right?
We have to rank the stocks now by ESG scores. You know that? We have to actually, the analyst has to, Bloomberg gives it an ESG score.
And you have to
And we have to
input
put that score on the report.
for your investors. Because that's
Our
the other.
investors want us to do it.
That's exactly right. So here's where everyone needs to realize there's always someone. Everyone has a boss, right? So you really have to pay attention. You can't just push it under the carpet, and it's just too important. It's not only important to us as a society and just the health of our globe, but it's important to the people that care about your company, and they'll go elsewhere because it really, truly is a major, major pressure. There are new functions now where people actually track the ESG success of their portfolio companies, their own company. They put out white papers. This is a whole new world.
Oh, yeah.
And again, that's certainly putting pressure on talent because it's drawing talent away from other functions that typically operated maybe in investor relations or marketing, and now they're being pulled over to ESG. This is always going to happen, right? You're always going to have some sort of new function that's not uncommon, but it is a real thing. And those who don't pay attention to it, I think, are going to lose more quickly than those who do. Because again, there are just choices out there.
Yeah, I don't know how an oil company scores well in ESG. I don't know how a coal company does. Like, it's sort of impossible.
So I'm not an expert on the industries, but I know enough to know that there are ways that they're getting around the negative score, and that
Carbon capture stuff,
yes,
capital spending relative to that, the board, yeah, a little bit.
But I think everyone has to be more conscious of it going forward. And part of it is, I'll say spin, I don't mean it negatively though.
Right.
And for example, mining, right? There are certain minerals that are mined that are actually beneficial to pull out of the earth and use as opposed to something that's manufactured.
Right.
So there's an education component that I think people have to be aware of and sensitive to, as opposed to just quickly dismissing, oh, it's a mining company, they're doing bad things.
Right.
I think that each company who's involved in those industries also has an opportunity to, like you said, offset, right? So if they're using machinery that uses diesel fuel or gasoline, maybe they have a way to use more electricity.
Right.
Maybe they have a way to use solar power to power their vehicles and their machinery that actually produce.
Helps their score.
Yeah, exactly, that offsets it. I use natural gas at home, and I use gas in my car. So I'm not exactly the most
Yeah, I understand.
modern person myself, but I don't want anyone shutting off the gas pumps, right? Not all of us have electric vehicles. So someone's got to produce that. And, I know there's pressures, for example, on university endowments, et
Oh,
cetera,
yes.
where they're pulling away from
Yes.
those sectors.
Yes.
That's obviously real, but there are still going to be investors that put money in those. You just have to operate a little differently and be more creative as a capital raiser.
Number one industry this year on the performance on the stock market, energy and oil. Just with all the ESG flows.
Wow.
It's unbelievable.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
That's wild.
It's just who would have thunk?
That's interesting.
You wanted to talk a little bit about COVID in general, I think. I know we hit on some of it.
Yeah, I mean,
But
do you think there's anything that we didn't cover that bothers you and that, maybe affects you and your company? You've had some people move away, for example.
so-
How have you managed that? Maybe you could talk and share your experience as a leader of your group, and
Yeah.
how have you managed the outflow?
Well, listen, I mean, it's clear as we age, quality of life starts to change. And there are people in my office, as is others, that don't want to be in New York anymore. For taxes, healthier life, like in Florida, where they think, you can walk around the block all day or all seasons. I had one kid, a very good analyst of mine, just couldn't deal with the pressure and moved out to Wyoming.
But he's still with your company.
Yeah, so all of them are. We were all set up to always work from home. So COVID was never an issue. But I've lost 3 or 4 out of the 2 analysts and 1 trader, and 1 other person. Basically, they're with me, but they're not in New York anymore.
And what is the impact that you have felt? Have you felt there to be a major decline in their productivity and effectiveness?
None.
So how do you feel about everyone going back to the office?
I'm trying to shrink my New York office space. I kind of see it sort of as maybe a few satellite type offices as opposed to one big office.
Or like a landing zone that people float in and out of, like
Exactly.
a hoteling kind of
And we'll
situation.
set the new place up differently with stations and whatever so that it's flexible when that person comes in and so forth. But yeah, I'm probably going to go from 18,000 square feet to 10 or under. But if you told me I was going to open up another satellite Florida office in the next 5 years, I'd say that's a good shot too.
So it's interesting because I know a lot of real estate investment companies, or those in the real estate business, have encouraged / forced their employees to go back to work. In part because they want people to see that it's safe, you can go back, you should go back.
Yeah.
And, I know a lot of people are really unhappy about that.
Yep.
Other people are very happy about it. So there's always going to be 2 sides,
Yep.
if not 3 or 4. On the flip side, I think to your point, so now you're offsetting some space in Manhattan, but you're going to be adding space in Florida.
Not
The
so
net-
fast, but
Okay, but
at
the
some
net
point
net,
maybe.
the long-term net actually could be greater in some respects, right? You don't know.
I don't know.
I think that
I don't know.
as with everything else, I think we just need to be flexible and not so rigid in our thinking, but be more creative and be open to, you know what, maybe talent isn't exactly at our doorstep. Maybe it's not around the corner. Maybe people want, the houses in my community have gone like hotcakes.
Yeah.
And we're, an hour and 15 out of the city.
I have never questioned any of these people's work ethic. So the work ethic, in my opinion, has stayed 100%, whether they're in New York in the office or at home. Now, do you miss the banter, the office banter about what I'm talking about, what someone else is talking about? maybe that's what you miss.
Yeah.
Office banter.
So in that regard, though, have you guys done anything, have you all done anything, not to use the word guys, that encourages just interaction that has worked really nicely? Or, I mean, we had an escape room game online one night. That was really fun.
No, we play shoots and ladders online. No, I'm only kidding.
Solitaire.
Oh.
Really, it's very interesting. Maybe not. But maybe it encourages you to think about, an employee event that's a little different,
Yeah.
or maybe a couple different events, right?
right.
And they can choose. They can go out for dinner. They can go,
right.
do a volunteer
Yeah,
event
yeah.
together, and you let different people spearhead those
Yep.
activities.
Yep.
Because I think, again, we all just, the choice is you could lose somebody over something that could have taken just a little bit of extra effort,
yeah.
right? And
Yep.
shown that you cared a little bit.
Yep.
And on the flip side, you make your employees really happy.
Yep.
They feel heard, they feel listened to, they feel valued, they feel
Yep.
welcomed, and that goes a really long way. It will certainly not be, I don't think that by not doing it, you'll drive people out, but I think they're more apt to be open
People
to
love
being
to
coached.
FaceTime with me, and they love to make phone calls with me. Even though our whole life was always on email anyway, back and forth. But you're right. I mean,
They want exposure to the
do.
senior person,
They
and that kind of toggles back to that junior
Yes.
access
Yep.
and training opportunity. People want access to the senior person because you've clearly been successful. They want to
Yep.
gather any information that they can
Correct.
to be helpful for their own benefit. Plus, you're a dynamic guy. They want to be around you.
I've had people in my backyards over for speeches. I'll probably have to do a party in my house.
I think
one-
it's
one
really
summer.
nice. The
That's what
fact
we'll have
that
to-
you're even
That's what
involved
we'll
in
have to
these.
do, yeah.
And the fact that you're even involved in these, to me, means that you're an extroverted guy who really likes to be around people and provide value. I think in certain industries that goes just a terrifically long way. And in
Yeah.
other industries, if you're the negative Nelly and you're the one that's kind of complaining a lot or really staying in your hole, you're going to get pointed out. I mean, at my company, I have a coffee date and a jumping jack date with one of my team members, and they really love it. And it's 15 minutes once a week at 7:45.
Right.
And we just kind of both get each other energized and have a cup of,
Right, right.
we do jumping jacks and we have a cup of coffee and sit down together and
Right,
just, I
right.
mean, it's goofy,
Right.
but I found out that she likes to work out and that she is getting her personal training certification on the side because it's something that she's motivated by. So I just tied in with what she's interested
Right,
in, but
understood.
in return, she's gravitated to me, which I really appreciate, and she's a valued member of my team. So I wanted to do something that was a little different. You can't always tap into all those personal interests in such a specific way, but sometimes you can do even just a little something that makes people feel valued and welcome. And again, that kind of ties back to that modern leadership. But again, it's like modern leadership, it's more about being a good human.
Yep.
And it starts when you're in middle school. I don't think it starts much earlier than middle school. I think that's expecting too much of, let kids be kids. But you start to see it really develop in middle school. And there are certainly people who gravitate more towards leadership than not. But everyone can be a leader in and of their own right somewhere in their life. It's usually about something that they're passionate about.
Right.
So, spending time volunteering, I think, is a really important way to develop leadership in the younger generation. And I think, but you have to find the right outlet for them to really want to do it over and over again. For example, it took my daughter a little bit of time, but she now is a youth leader at our church. And that's really spoken to her. Every time I asked her to do something that was not in that realm, she just really didn't want to do it. My son, he loves helping, whether it be at like food drives or other things in the community, setting up the Christmas tree sale or what have you. Each person's just so totally
Yeah.
motivated
Yeah,
differently. And
I agree.
I think that that, just tapping a little bit of that as a parent, as a grandparent, as an aunt, as a godparent, as, you know, just a mentor, as a friend, I think that is all really important for us to develop in each other, and we can develop in each other with a little bit of interest and a little bit of time.
Great. I thank you, Liz and Caldwell. I really appreciate this talk.
My pleasure, my
Rabbi,
pleasure.
I think if we'll take any, if any questions here, Brian.
Thanks, Liz. It was
My
really
pleasure.
informative. My question is, you talk about the corporate culture, and what do you see in terms of, and you talked about how companies that are more ethnically diverse do better and so on, but what do you see companies who are working remotely versus companies who are full-time in place, how they fare? Are there any statistics on that?
I'm not aware of any statistics on that. I think it really depends on the nature of the industry and how much in-person presence is required for that company to be successful in that industry. Obviously, some industries are more apt to needing people be in person versus others. I think a balance is probably a good idea for most companies, but it would be hard to think of a company that required 100% in person other than
If you have to
a
manufacture or
restaurant.
make something.
And you were hands-on in your manufacturing process. But even in your manufacturing process, you can likely automate a lot of it.
Yeah, yeah.
So, you know, I heard that IBM and McDonald's are in a deal together to automate the drive-through now. So you're taking away people from that whole function. But you know what? They're going to be put into something else. And maybe that frees that talent up to now go and be a waiter at a nicer restaurant, earn a higher wage or more tips. Who knows? But I don't necessarily know, to answer your question directly again, I don't necessarily know of statistics that really put a company in favor or out of favor in contrast to another. I do always believe it just comes down to the people in the community, because every company is also set up differently. Some have one office, some have multiple, and I think that you have to be nimble and flexible according to your own corporate structure. But if you have, let's say, one office here in Oyster Bay, but the perfect person was introduced to you who's in Florida, if you could figure out a way for that person to be part of your company and still add value, I say go for it. What do you have to lose? And if you're hands-on enough, it should be a win, not a loss.
Thank you.
Thanks for the question.
Anybody else? Well, I thank you so much, and pleasure
It was a
doing
pleasure.
this with you.
It was a pleasure. Thank you,
Rabbi,
everybody.
Thank you. Thank you, Brian. Thank you to everybody, and I hope you all have a great evening.